Good morning, everybody. I am Linda Parsons. For those of you who do not know who I am the President and CEO of the Moore County Chamber of Commerce. This is our 7th partnership with Hicks, and we are thrilled to be doing this again. It is a great event. We've transitioned completely to virtual, and as Ted just said, it's been one of our highest registrations year to date. This event is a great opportunity for you to plan for your year, plan your business. What is the pace of growth going to be? Is there a recession? I'm going to say the R word. I was just speaking with Dr. Walden. Is he going to have any control on the price of eggs? And, what are the latest trends that we're going to see for 2023? I don't know that all those questions are going to be answered today, but hopefully you'll be able to get some great insight as you plan your year. Ted, I want to thank you once again for sponsoring this event, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Linda. It's been an honor to partner with you in the chamber for all these years. So thank you for allowing us to come alongside you and do this for you and the members. Michael Walden is a William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor Emeritus. That is a mouthful at North Carolina State University and president of Walden Economic Consulting. During his 43 years on the faculty at NC State, Walden became recognized as an expert on the state economy and public policy. He's the author of 13 books and over 330 articles and reports, and he has made more than 3,000 personal appearances. Walden is also a frequent contributor to the national and state media and has appeared on all the major national news outlets. He continues to write a biweekly newspaper column distributed throughout North Carolina. He's won numerous awards for his forecasting. He's got another book. I'm sure we'll get a plug for that. And when Linda and I don't know if we ever told you this, Dr. Walden, but when Linda and I started brainstorming this apparently 8 years ago, when we said, well, who are we going to get for an economist? I said, well, we got to get Dr. Walden. So with that said, Dr. Walden, if you don't know, because we're plugged in, I just told you my team has texted me. We know that GDP was forecasted to be 2.6. It came in, the print was 2.9. So okay. With that said, I'll let you take it away.
Well, very good. Thank you, Ted and Linda, and thank you for again asking me to do this. I enjoy this very much. I was down, and I was telling Ted and Linda, I was down in Moore County yesterday. They're still doing live a presentation. So people are interested in the economy. And my job here is not to give you a perfect forecast. I don't know any economist who can do that. But what I rather try to do is to explain what's happening, particularly in terms of policy actions, and give you a roadmap to where things might go. And as you get continuing news, like Ted just gave the latest GDP numbers, as you get continuing news, hopefully you'll be better able to interpret that and then use that more fruitfully for your business decisions. So with that said, if you're looking at the title here, try to be a little humorous. Economists are not known for their humor, but I try to inject some humor. We've got 3 things going on that are troubling: inflation, labor shortages, recession. Oh my, sort of a homage to a famous film, which is escaping me right now. And really, I think what people are yearning for now, after 3 years of dealing with COVID, and then the other 2 things, obviously labor shortage and inflation, people are looking for normality. They're looking for a normal situation, in some sense what we had prior to COVID. I will say at the start, the economy does go through what we call business cycles. I'm going to come back to this later. Where we do, growth is not even. We never have had an economy where growth is consistently a certain percentage, where inflation doesn't go up and down. So, and we have labor shortages periodically in certain sectors. But I think what's really made people, quite frankly, fearful over the last 3 years, it seems like we're having all of these bad things at once. So anyway, my goal here is to be your guide to the economy, and hopefully as you get more understanding of what's going on, even though I can't promise you good things around the corner, at least you'll have some understanding. And if you know what's going on, I think that lessens the concern. So next slide, Ted.
Amen. Now, while we go to the next slide, I also want to give everybody just a heads up on how to ask questions. We are going to try to land the plane a couple minutes early so we can get some good questions for Dr. Walden. And on the screen are some instructions on how to do that. Just click that orange caret, and then you'll see at the bottom, you click the questions and you can type a question in there, and I will get the questions and field them at the end of the presentation. Linda had to step away because apparently the technology is down there in the building, and there's about 20 to 30 people sitting with inside the chamber building. So that's where she stepped away to, but we're just gonna keep on going. So Dr. Walden.
And I misspoke. Obviously, I'm in Moore County today. Virtually, it was Sampson County I was at yesterday. Anyway, the slide you're looking at, and Ted just mentioned some new GDP numbers, is the path of GDP. And GDP is gross domestic product. It's the value of everything we produce in the economy, whether it's a product or service, whether it's public or private. It's the go-to number for economists to get a sense of what the aggregate economy is doing, not what individual sectors are doing, but the aggregate economy. And these are index numbers, so don't get hung up on the numbers on the scale on the left. But what I'm trying to show you is how things have tracked over the last 3 years. And if you look at the left-hand side, you can see where we were pre-pandemic, fourth quarter 2019. You can see the tremendous drop in the economy in the first quarter of 20 and first and second quarters of 2020. That has now been designated as the COVID-19 recession. I mean, no surprise. This was an odd recession because in some sense it was a mandated recession. It was a response, governmental response to the pandemic, to the virus, in order to slow the spread, as you remember. Governors in most states said we've got to limit personal interaction. So Governor Cooper, for example, said if you don't have to go out for essentials, stay home. He also said that certain sectors where there's a lot of personal contact, restaurant industry, personal services, gyms, et cetera, he ordered those to be closed. So we knew that, we being economists, knew that was going to cause a recession. Indeed, it did. It was a very sharp drop, as you can see. But the good news is when May rolled around in May of 2020, we saw that most governors, including Governor Cooper, began to relax, not eliminate, but relax the constraints. And so we had a rebound in the economy. The other thing that was going on in May was that we were starting to see the first tranche, if you will, of stimulus money come through. The first $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan was passed in March of 2020. That money started to flow through. That was your stimulus checks. That was your augmented unemployment compensation. That was your payroll protection plan money and a whole other assortment of things. And that started to revive the economy also. So from the end of the second quarter of 2020 until really the current, we have been on a growth path. And you can see the path in North Carolina and the path in the nation. Now, I will draw your attention to, if you can find 2022 first quarter on the bottom, then look up. For the nation, you can see, oh, thank you, Ted. The nation, you can see, if you go down to the green line, Ted, the nation, you can see a slight decline in GDP, actually over 2 quarters. We had a slight decline in North Carolina, it was only 1 quarter. But anyway, that decline in 2-quarter GDP growth in first 2 quarters of 2022, many people said, oh, that means we're in a recession, or actually afterward, we were in a recession. And many economists scoffed at this for 2 reasons. Number one, the statement that if you have a decline in GDP for 2 consecutive quarters, that means a recession. That's a rule of thumb. The official definition is a broad-based decline in economic activity that lasts a significant period of time. That's a very subjective definition. The people who call a recession is a group that sits outside the federal government. They work with a think tank called the National Bureau of Economic Research. It's the oldest, one of the oldest think tanks ever. It's been around over 100 years, very prestigious. There are a group of 8 economists who sit on something called the Business Cycle Dating Committee. Doesn't have anything to do with things like Tinder or anything. This is a group of economists who track a whole lot of data in the economy. And they are the ones who are charged with saying, all right, from this period to this period, we've actually had a decline in economic activity that was enough, that was broad-based, and we're going to declare a recession. Now, they take their time coming to a decision. So we have not heard from them on the decline in the first 2 quarters. My particular view is why this will not be called, this being the decline in the first 2 quarters, a recession, as it was not broad-based. It was primarily related to a decline in labor productivity. If you think about it, during the pandemic, when a lot of people were at home, yet when production was coming back, we had a surge in labor productivity. In other words, output per person. And then once we were pretty much fully open and people were back to work, that surge in labor productivity actually declined a little bit. That's, I think, the real reason why we had. So it's more of a technical thing, because we didn't see unemployment go down. We didn't see employment go down. We didn't see the unemployment rate go up. In fact, the job market during that period of time was very robust. So this is just a point of explanation. It doesn't really have anything to do with where we're going forward. But I don't think we've had a recession in the last year. Next slide, Ted. All right, I want to talk about what I call the big 3 issues: labor market, inflation, and recession. So let me take those in order. Next slide, Ted. These are 2 slides about the labor market. I think when I spoke to you last year, I used these 2 slides, but they've been updated. If you look at the left-hand side, you can see both in the nation and North Carolina, the big jump, major jump in unemployment. We got to about 14% unemployment, the highest in the post-World War II era. But since when the economy began to recover, you can see a big drop, very quick drop in unemployment rate. And right now we're sitting at unemployment rates both in the nation and in North Carolina at about the levels we had pre-pandemic, slightly under 4%. So that's a very good indicator. But does it really say anything about the labor shortage? No, it really doesn't. That's better captured by the second slide on the right, which is something called the labor force participation rate. And let me just give you a quick explanation. Labor force participation rate, first of all, takes as anyone who is 16 or over is a potential person who could be working. So this number uses as its base the people who are 16 or over in age. Doesn't matter if you're retired. Doesn't matter what you're doing. The only groups that are excluded from this are people in the military and people who are incarcerated. So this is a big base. And then what the numbers, the calculation number is, they simply say, all right, let's take the number of people who are working or looking for work, and then take that as a percentage of this very big base that they call the labor force. And so if you look at the left-hand side, pre-pandemic at the national level, we had a labor force participation rate of about 63.5, North Carolina about 61.5. I get the question all the time, why is North Carolina lower? Because we got a lot more retirees per capita here. And remember, retirees are in the base. So you see a big drop in labor force participation, which we'd expect because a large part of the economy was shut down, then a rapid rebound when the economy recovered. And if you look at the right-hand side, when I'm pausing, I'm taking a sip of water. If you look at the far right-hand side, the difference between this and the unemployment rate is we're not back to pre-pandemic levels. In fact, we're about 1.5 percentage under for both the nation and North Carolina. What does that mean in terms of numbers? That means that if we had the same labor force participation rate now as we had pre-pandemic at the national level, we'd have about 2 million more people working. In North Carolina, we'd have about 50,000 more people working. That goes a long way to getting rid of some of the labor shortages. So that's the issue. We just don't have as many people who are out there working or looking for work as a percent of the possibilities. Next slide, Ted. Now, why is this? What's holding back the labor force? Well, there are a number of factors here. One thing is we have very slow population growth. So as the economy is expanding, businesses expand, they need more people, but population growth is not keeping up. And to put an accent on that, we have a population is increasingly becoming older. This is common throughout the world. And of course, older people tend not to, even though they're included as potential in the labor force, obviously the older you get, the less likely you are going to be working. And then we have 2 key groups in the population that we see are really responsible for a lot of that shortage in labor force participation. One is my group. I'm 72, so I'm in the group that's defined as 55 and older. The labor force participation rate of potential older workers has really plunged during the pandemic and has not come back near to what it was. I think a lot of that is due to older people worried about personal interaction. I mean, COVID is still out there. They worry about personal interactions, et cetera. And then the other group is, interestingly, it's at the other end of the age scale. It's labor force participation of 18 to 24-year-olds. It's way down still from what it was pre-pandemic. Now, this controls for the likelihood that a lot of those folks are in college, so this adjusts for that. And economists, quite frankly, are still scratching their head about what's the best explanation for why we're getting less labor force participation of 18 to 24-year-olds. There are a lot of possibilities. One is that obviously that's the age group when a lot of those folks are in college, and because payments on student loans have been suspended, they were suspended during the pandemic and they are still being suspended. That's a big chunk of money that a lot of them don't have to pay, and so that maybe reduces their incentive to work. I think another possibility is that young people, particularly in that age group, they have changed their concept of what they want out of life. They want more of a work-life balance. They're not as motivated necessarily to work. No, I'm not criticizing them. It's just how people view the world. So anyway, there's going to be more research on that, but those are the two demographic groups where that are most responsible for the lower labor force participation. Next slide. Now, another factor, one more factor I want to mention, I think I brought this up last year and I just reiterate it. I can remember my late father who worked as a carpenter, and I grew up in Ohio, and Ohio winters were very significant. And most of his work was outside as a carpenter. So it was common for him, December, January, February, about those 3 months, to get laid off from work. And he knew it was coming. He could plan for it. We could plan our budget, et cetera. My mom sometimes went and took a temporary job to fill in the gap. But he knew he was going to go back to the same job, which he did. Did that for the 40 plus years he worked as a carpenter. What happened this time around is that many people who were furloughed from their job during the pandemic, so this is primarily 2020, and they had financial support because of all the COVID programs. So a lot of them didn't have to worry about putting food on the table, shelter, et cetera. They had support. Rather than simply saying, oh, I've got an extended vacation, I'm just going to have fun. A significant percent, the best estimate that I've seen is 20%. 20% of furloughed workers said, you know what I'm going to do? Instead of when the economy reopens, going back to that job that I didn't like, or saying going back to that job that didn't pay much, I'm going to upgrade my skills during this free time I have. And about 20% of them did. 20% of the furloughed workers did. And so they maybe went to community college, they maybe took courses online, or some folks simply just accessed information that could upgrade their skills online. You can take courses that are not affiliated with any university, actually some that are, that cost you nothing. So anyway, when those folks then came back to the labor force, they said, I don't have to go back to, I'll just use an example, nothing against restaurants, but I've got friends in the restaurant business who are still concerned about labor. They said to themselves, I don't have to go back to that restaurant job that pays maybe minimum wage and the hours are crazy, et cetera. I can now get a job maybe in a tech firm, not at a high level, but at least at some entry level where I'm going to get paid more. So we've had a reallocation of labor that's also a factor. And if you look in North Carolina, there are a couple sectors where labor shortages is really pronounced. Certainly, hospitality is one that would include restaurants. Their total employment is up, but it's up about 0.5%. Manufacturing is another, same thing. Their employment is up from pre-pandemic, but only about 0.5%. And the third is government. Government employment is actually still down from where it was pre-pandemic. So there are other things going on here other than simply elderly not working as much in that 18 to 24-year-old. Next slide, Ted. Now, I think there's no sign. I mean, I do think the labor shortages in particularly those three sectors will ease up. I think in North Carolina, the question is, will the labor force grow as the economy grows? Because we are a state that is really on the move economically. And what I think we're going to see more and more of is technology come in. You know that technology, as it grows and expands and gets more capable, it's being able to, businesses are able to be using technology for more and more things. In fact, you may have read and seen on the news that McDonald's, my first employer when I was 16, McDonald's now opened their first, what they're calling all digital restaurant, I think in Fort Worth, Texas. It's a test case where there are a couple people inside the building working, but they're pretty much there to make sure the machines are working, et cetera. But it's a restaurant where you don't interact with people. Like when I worked at McDonald's, people come in, they go up to the counter. I worked the counter for a while. Sometimes I worked on the grill. I mean, there were people there, a lot of interaction. This all digital restaurant, most of the activity is done by machines or robots, et cetera. And so I think that is certainly a path forward for a lot of industries and firms that are having problems. Now, on the other hand, I've got friends who in Raleigh who have just thrown in a towel. I have one friend who had a cocktail lounge. She had one of the first. She was really ahead of her time. Cocktail lounges, as you know, are especially for young people, are very popular. She was ahead of her time. About 15 years ago, she opened one that was kind of almost a speakeasy type thing, although it was all legal, but it looked like a speakeasy from the 1920s. COVID, of course, she shut down. She came back from COVID, reopened, could never find enough people to work. And she tried to reorganize her cocktail lounge to use less people, just didn't work. And she's my age. And so eventually she got to the point, I'm too old for this. And she shut down, just totally shut down her business. So there's still a lot of folks out there being challenged. But anyway, watch for more technology in the labor force going forward. Next slide, Ted. Okay, let's look now at inflation. Inflation, of course, is always with us. Inflation is defined as if you look at the overall inflation rate, it's based on the government going out and surveying thousands of prices each month and looking at how much prices for each commodity and service go up. They average those. It's not just a simple average. It's weighted based on the importance of the product or service in our budgets. So, for example, housing actually gets the biggest weight. A can of beans would get a very small weight. And usually we quote inflation because we think of things in terms of years as year over year. So if you look at most of the 21st century, actually all the 21st century until now, inflation was a non-issue. I see a lot of young people at the gym, at the Y, and I've got one young person who has just been working in his own business for a while, and he'll talk to me and say, Dr. Walden, he calls me Dr. Walden. I keep telling him, no, call me Mike, but no, he insists. He said, I don't understand this. This is crazy. Inflation prices going up 9%, some double digit, eggs going up. So I just don't get this. And I say to him, I say, Jamal, I understand, but we've been through this before. It's just that we've not been through it before in your lifetime. And I try to give him some ideas of why this is happening. So that's one reason why I think inflation's really hit the headlines, because a lot of people, the younger generation, particularly the Z generation, the I generation, some call them, those born since 2000, they've never seen this. So if you look at this graph, and I've only gone back to 2014, up until 2020, inflation, no one thought about inflation. We were running about 1-2%. One year we got to 3%. And for most people, that would seem very normal. Their pay increases covered that, so it was not a big deal. And that was a real achievement in our economy, because I've been around this for so long. Typically, we'd have bouts of inflation every 4 or 5 years. So to have a track record where about 20 years in a row, actually go back to the 1990s, include that, for almost 30 years, inflation was a non-issue. Then all of a sudden, as you can see, pop up at the end of 2020, end of 2021, into 2022, inflation just surged. And we went from, as you can see, about 2%, 1% in 2020, up to a peak, we hope it's a peak of 9.1% of June of last year. Now we've had some success in seeing inflation go down. The latest reading from December, 6.5%. These are all year over year. And very quickly, I don't want to dwell on this because I think I probably emphasized this last year. Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Well, essentially, in economics, everything comes down to supply and demand. In fact, I would jokingly tell my students when I give them an essay test where they actually had to fill in things and make some coherent answer, I would jokingly say to them, look, if you get to a question and you have no clue what the answer is, write down supply and demand. I'll probably give you a partial credit because everything in economics can be boiled down. And we had a perfect storm develop in the economy that really set off the inflation surge. On the demand side, which means people and businesses buying things, throughout most of 2020, even though money was flowing into the economy from the stimulus programs, the economy was largely shut down. So people, and there were restrictions still on people going out, and people were afraid. So people were not out buying. They were being very frugal. Then when the economy started to pick up, all that money that flowed into the economy from the government, and actually in total, and this is across two administrations, so there's no partisanship here. If you add up the stimulus plans during the Trump administration and the stimulus plans during the Biden administration, I'm excluding from the Biden administration the infrastructure plan and the climate plan because those are more long-run investments. $5.5 trillion, 5.5 trillion was pumped into the economy in the span of about less than 3 years. And that set a record, even more than the money that the Roosevelt administration pumped in during the 1930s. When you adjust for the changing different purchasing power then, dollars were worth more than, even when you adjust that, nowhere near. So this was a record intervention by the federal government. So you had, when the economy opened, you had people with the ability now to go out and spend. In fact, Wells Fargo's estimated that at the end of 2020, people had accumulated an extra $2 trillion in their savings accounts, a variety of investment accounts, I should say, due to the fact that they had all this money flowing in and they didn't have anywhere to spend it. And so that really set them up in 2021 and 2022 to really go out and spend. But at the same time, on the supply side, what do we have? Supply chain problems. So you had a perfect storm of people trying to spend a lot, yet there wasn't as much product for them to spend it on. And in our system and in economics, prices go up. Now, we have had some reduction in the inflation rate. Next slide, Ted. And there are several reasons for this. One is the supply chain's back. The supply chain has largely been fixed, not perfect, but if you want some data on this, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has an index of the supply chain, and if you look at that, their latest numbers, we're pretty much back to where we were pre-pandemic, so that's good. Next slide, Ted. We have seen, of course, gas prices, very, very essential product, gasoline in our economy, not just for drivers, personal drivers, but obviously trucking industry, et cetera. You can see the big jump in gas prices in 2021 and 2022, but now we've had a big drop. Little bit of rebound recently, but those have gone down on trend, obviously, since their peak. So that's helped in terms of the inflation rate. Now, I will say one big factor with the more recent drop, say since the middle last year to the end of mid 2022 to the end of 2022 is China. China, and probably many of you have seen this, has gone through went through in 2022 another major bout of COVID, and the Chinese administration responded by a very severe clampdown. In fact, you probably saw news stories where people were locked in their apartment buildings, and people were arrested, and there were demonstrations, and it really got pretty ugly. But China China is still the world's factory. But Chinese output was sort of at a halt, and means they weren't using as much energy and oil. So that also helped to the decline in gas prices, and this is actually responsible for the recent boost in gas prices, as you can see on the most recently. And actually, this slide's a couple days old, a week old. But China's now back. President Xi has now. There are a lot of people are trying to interpret why this has been going on, but President Xi actually has given in and reopen things. So China's back, and that's responsible for some of the rise. Another reason for why we've had a recent decline is gas prices always go down during the winter because people aren't driving as much. But anyway, this has certainly helped the gas situation. Next slide, Ted. Another reason is that the Federal Reserve, and I'm going to talk much more about the Federal Reserve in a moment, the Federal Reserve right now is trying to not necessarily cause people to spend less, but slow down their rate of growth of spending. They're trying to tamper down spending. And if you can see by the latest number, that's starting to kick in, a very small increase in consumer spending in November. And of course, we had a little rebound in December because of Christmas. And I think next slide, Ted, I think that might be the final one. And then one other thing, and I'm going to get, this is a lead into the Federal Reserve. I'm going to tell you in a moment that one of the Federal Reserve's powers is the ability to both create and destroy money. And one of the things that the Federal Reserve did during COVID was to try to help the economy survive and try to make sure that we didn't have a collapse. They printed a lot of money. They don't literally print anymore, it's all digital. But they pumped a lot of money that they created into the economy. And you can see this if you look at the middle there, which is roughly 20, you can see the gray area is the COVID recession. You can see a big increase in the money supply. Yeah, thank you, Ted, from where it was in 2019. Now, right now, Ted, if you can move that along right there, you can see that they've actually been now doing the opposite. They're pulling money out. Again, this is all part of their plan to try to slow things down. So this has also contributed to the slower rate of inflation. Next slide, Ted. So, big question on everyone's mind. I had a couple of reporters call me on this yesterday. Is with the good news we've had recently on the inflation rate, again, year over year, 6.5%. Does this mean we're headed on a permanent path of lower inflation? Again, take every economic forecast with a big grain of salt, but I think the answer is yes. And I think at the end of this year, we could see an inflation rate, again, year over year, of somewhere between 3 and 4%. Still a little higher than the Fed's goal of a 2% rate, which is where we were pre-pandemic. But I think so. So I do think there's some good news ahead on inflation. Let me say something real quick about egg prices, because I got a call on this yesterday, and of course, people who use eggs, which my wife is a big baker. She buys a couple dozen of eggs each week. She comes from a family of bakers, and she's been shocked by the price. This really doesn't have anything to do with the pandemic. It's the avian flu. Now, maybe the avian flu has something to do with the pandemic. I don't know. But the avian flu comes and goes sometimes in the poultry market. It's taken millions of laying heads off the market, and also compound that with the fact that there are few substitutes for eggs. I mean, if you're a baker like my wife is, you need eggs. There's no substitute. So this has resulted in a gigantic increase, obviously, in egg prices. But that's really, unless the pandemic had something with creating the avian flu, which I don't think, because the avian flu has been around a long time. This is just something that's coincidental. It's really not pandemic related. And so we got to get the avian flu in under control, which I think it will be, but it's still raging before egg prices go down. So my advice there is, if you're not a baker and you just occasionally have eggs for breakfast, maybe think of some alternative to go to, I don't know, yogurt or something that gives you the same protein content. All right, move on. All right, now let me move into recession. Probably the biggest question a lot of folks have. Specifically, what is a recession? As I said earlier, recession is defined by economists as a broad-based decline in economic activity that lasts for a significant period of time. That's a very, very general definition. Again, the rule of thumb about 2 consecutive quarter decline in GDP, that's a rule of thumb, usually does coincide with this. But anyway, that is the official definition used by the National Bureau of Economic Research. And again, the federal government farms out to them the calling of recessions. Next slide. Now, recession, I've tried to inject a little humor here with some pictures. You may hear this as odd, but a recession is often the medicine used to cure high inflation. So, and I know a lot of you are shaking your heads and saying, come on, Can't you economists do better? So you're going to inflict a different kind of pain on us to cure another kind of pain? That's crazy. Well, let me explain. As I indicated earlier, inflation is really caused by demand buying outpacing supply. I go back to the egg example. Why have egg prices soared so much? Supply has been curtailed dramatically, and although some people have reduced their buying of eggs, not enough. And so we still have this imbalance between buying and supply. That's why, for example, when storms come through, hurricanes or hurricanes mainly, fortunately we don't get a lot of tornadoes here in North Carolina, and you have maybe, I don't know, pick your, I'll use the standard economic example of a widget. That's a fictitious product, but it's used for economic examples. Let's say widgets are in short supply because the widget manufacturer has shut down and you can't get widgets in the stores. And so you go to buy a widget and you find, wow, there are only a couple of them and the price is sky high. Well, that's because unless demand shrinks commensurately, if people are still trying to buy widgets and there are not enough widgets to satisfy that demand, price is going to go up. So what the Federal Reserve is trying to do is to slow buying in order to take the pressure off of prices. Now, unfortunately, economics is not like physics. In physics or pretty much any of the natural sciences, chemistry, if you do A, you know exactly you're going to get B. A and B are totally related, 100%. In economics, it's not like that. You do A, you're hoping to get B, but you may not get exactly B. You may get around B because we're dealing with human beings. And how people, for example, just to give you an example, how people respond today to interest rate hikes may be different than how they responded 20 years ago, because you have different people and different makeup. So the Federal Reserve knows that they want to slow spending down. They're using their tools, which I'll talk about in a minute, raising interest rates and pulling money out of the economy to slow spending. They would like to do it such that they get slower growth, but they still get the economy growing, so therefore they avoid a recession. So they want to do it exactly right to reduce inflation, yet without a recession. But they don't know exactly how much to slow to get that because it's not a perfect science. So oftentimes we do see efforts by the Federal Reserve to reduce inflation associated with recessions. The best example and of course this has been an example that's been discussed many times in the last couple of years, is going back 40 years ago. I was a younger professor then, going back 40 years ago, early 1980s, when the inflation rate actually peaked at 13%, much higher than the 9 now. But we had the same problem. People were trying to spend too much compared to demand, compared to supply. We didn't have a supply chain problem. It was primarily on the spending side. And the Federal Reserve chair then, a guy named Paul Volcker, came in, was appointed first by President Carter, kept by President Reagan. And he was given the task initially by President Carter to reduce the rate of inflation. It was 13%. I mean, it was untenable, even politically untenable to have it that high. And Volcker immediately said he had been in government for decades. He was a Princeton PhD, had worked in banking, or worked in Treasury Department, I should say, for his whole entire career. He knew exactly what to do. And I'm paraphrasing now, he probably said something like this to either President Carter or President Reagan. He probably said something like, well, I know how to do this. I'm going to raise interest rates to cool the economy off. That'll cause people and businesses to spend less. And I don't know if he told them this or not, but he had to raise the federal funds rate. Right now, the federal funds rate's at 4.5%. He had to raise it to 19%. Remember, we had inflation at 13. 19%. That was guaranteed, as much as a guarantee I can think of in economics, that we were going to have a recession. And we had a bad recession in 1981 and 82. In fact, just to give you a little political anecdote, President Reagan, of course, was elected in 1980. Was going to run for re-election in 84. All of the political pundits in the early 80s said there is no way Reagan is going to be re-elected. His popularity rates, percentages were down in the 30s, lower than President Biden today, and everyone had written him off. Well, Volcker's medicine worked. he got the inflation rate went from 13% in 1981 to 3% in 84. So when Reagan ran for re-election, inflation was not a problem. In fact, he was praised for being the overseer of this great slaying, if you will, of the inflation dragon. But we had to endure an absolutely horrendous recession, one of the worst we've had in the post-World War II era. So this is the issue. Next slide. All right, let me dig a little deeper, take a little deeper dive into the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve has two main powers, and the Federal Reserve, just to remind you, it's not a department of the federal government like the Defense Department or the Treasury Department or Homeland Security that operates under the president and is controlled by the president. Of course, the president appoints secretaries for those departments, but it's not like that. The Federal Reserve is an independent. It's in a federal agency, but it's independent. It doesn't get its budget from the Congress. It gets its budget from member banks. Its charter says that the governors or the managers of the Federal Reserve, they are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, but they have, I think, 12-year terms, except for the chair who has a 4-year term. So the Federal Reserve is designed to be independent, and they have two big powers. These are key. One is they have a couple of interest rates they directly control. The most notable is called the federal funds rate, which is simply the interest rate that banks charge each other for loans. And when they move that federal funds rate up or down, usually other interest rates follow. Now, not exactly, but they will trend in the direction, usually for most of them, of the federal funds rate. And then the other power the Federal Reserve has, as I've already alluded to, is they can create and destroy money. They have the power to print, and again, it's all digital now, create and destroy money. And if you look at, I'll explain the right-hand one in a minute, but if you look at the left-hand side graph, federal funds rate, you can see the Federal Reserve actually pushed interest rates to historic lows during the pandemic. Again, they were trying to stimulate spending. And you can see the federal funds rate was close to zero in 2021. This is why, for example, let me ask a question. What market really surged during most of the pandemic? The housing market. Housing prices zoomed up. Housing sales zoomed. Why was that? Because money was cheap, essentially free. So mortgage rates were at historic lows, and people who had the funds, and a lot of people did because of the stimulus checks, et cetera, they went out and bought houses and financed them very cheaply, and that was a result of the big surge in housing prices. So the housing market actually benefited, but most markets didn't respond quite like that. But the whole point of the low interest rates was to stimulate spending. Now, what have the Federal Reserve been doing recently? They're going in the opposite direction. They now want to curtail spending. They have moved from fighting one thing, which was recession, was recession during the pandemic. They were fighting that. Now they've turned their sides to fighting inflation. And so the opposite policy now is in hand, where they have now, you can see, taken interest rates their interest rate from effectively 0 to 4.5%, and they're going to go higher. They meet, was it next week? They have a 2-day meeting, January 31st, February 1st. They will raise interest rates again. There is no question. Question is just how high, and they're probably going to stick with 0.5%. Maybe they'll go with 0.25%. They won't go with 0.75%. But I don't think that's the end. I think my particular forecast is probably going to go up the federal funds rate close to 6%. Now, on the right-hand side, you see the size of the Federal Reserve's portfolio of Treasury securities. Now, why do I use Treasury securities? Well, when the federal government wants to spend money and they don't have the money to spend, they have to borrow it. How do they borrow it? They issue debt. What's the debt? It's called Treasury securities. Anyone in the world can buy Treasury securities. In fact, I'm sure Ted advises some of his clients to have Treasury securities. If you're not with Ted, you're with someone else. I'm sure you got some Treasury securities somewhere in your portfolio. They're considered very good investments because the federal government has never defaulted on them. Well, we got a question of that now, which I could address maybe in the Q&A. But anyway, anyone can buy Treasury securities, including the Federal Reserve. And when the Federal Reserve buys Treasury securities, what do? How do they pay for it? They make money. They create money. And so they buy them, and then they push their money into they fund whomever is issuing the treasury security, the federal government. So the bottom line here is you can see the Federal Reserve's holdings of treasury securities went from $2 trillion in 2019 to almost $6 trillion in 2021. What does that mean? They added $4 trillion. And what was going on during this time? This was when all the COVID programs Congress were being passed, the 5.5 trillion. So what this literally means is of the 5.5 trillion in COVID relief money that was funneled into the economy by, again, 2 administrations. I want to be nonpartisan about this. 4 trillion of the 5.5 trillion was essentially financed by the Federal Reserve. That's why the money supply went up so fast. You can see it in the previous slide. Now, again, the Federal Reserve is going in the opposite direction. You can see a little bit of downturn in their holdings of Treasury securities. And again, you saw that also in the graph that showed the money supply going down. So bottom line here is the focus of economic policy, particularly from the Federal Reserve, has totally shifted away from fighting recession. We did have a COVID recession and its aftermaths, to now fighting inflation. Next slide. Now, as I said, Federal Reserve wants to achieve the soft landing, which means get the inflation down without causing a recession. Next slide, Ted. And we do have signs that the economy is slowing. Real estate activity has dropped. Manufacturing has actually contracted. Manufacturing, if you single that out as a sector, is actually in a recession. Hiring has slowed. We're still hiring, but at a slower pace. Consumer spending has slowed. So again, we do have signs the economy is slowing. The question is, will this ultimately get us to the Fed's goal of a 2% inflation rate, or do they have to do more? Next slide, Ted. And here in North Carolina, I do a monthly report called a North Carolina leading, what do I call it? North Carolina leading economic indicators. Been doing this for about 20 years. All this is, what this is supposed to do is I use data that are supposed to lead other indicators or other data so that you get a heads up of a change in the economy. And I massage the data and put them into one number. And if you look on the far right-hand side, maybe Ted, take your cursor over to the far right-hand side, you can see that there has been a drop in this index from May. It's trended downward, not every month, but it's trended downward. And that tells me, or at least that what the index is saying, North Carolina's economy is going to slow. Now, it doesn't say recession. No, recession means growth not only slows, but it starts to retreat. It starts to be negative. That's not really saying that. But the fact that it's gone down, but not gone clearly as much, if you look back, say at you can see the other periods of time when we've dropped, or maybe Ted, take the cursor all the way to the left, which is the drop that preceded the subprime recession of 2008, 2009. You can see the drop right now is not as severe as those other two. So there's at least hope there that maybe right now we're not yet seeing a total prediction for recession. Next slide. Now, can the Fed achieve this soft landing? I think that is maybe one of the big questions. I mean, clearly we're going to have at least a slower growing economy, but can we avoid an economy that's not growing and in fact is retreating? That would be a recession. Well, I think there's several factors working against this. One, the Fed got started late. If you look at, you might be asking, have there been any times where the Fed has been able to reduce inflation without causing a recession? The answer is yeah. The most notable, Alan Greenspan did it twice in the 90s. In the 90s, we had almost two recessions that no one remembers now because we didn't have recessions. Greenspan, of course, he was Fed chair for 19 years, one of the most successful, I consider him the most successful Fed chairman ever, but other people have their opinions. He had an uncanny ability, Alan Greenspan. He's still with us, by the way. I think he's 93 or more. He had an uncanny ability. A masterful ability. In fact, someone wrote a biography of him called The Master, Master of the Economy, or something like that. Very, very readable. Highly recommend it. He had an uncanny ability to see where the economy was going before other people did. And this is probably his years of being an economic consultant, He studied under a person at Columbia, what was his name? I forget now. Maybe it was Arthur Burns, not sure, who was one of the pioneers in developing economic indicators. But anyway, Greenspan in the 90s twice saw the early signs of inflation starting to tick up and immediately took action, raised the federal funds rate. He nipped inflation in the bud, as Arnie Fife would say, and we avoided recession. One problem with today's Fed is they got started late. You remember in most of 2021, everyone was saying, administration was saying, Treasury Secretary Yellen, who had been a Fed chair, was saying, and the Fed was saying itself, this is temporary. This is temporary. We don't have an inflation problem. It's going to go away very quickly. And the Fed really didn't get started seriously to raising interest rates until late 2021. Now, I want to pause just a minute and somewhat defend the Fed as well as Treasury Secretary Yellen. If you remember, well, you may not, I'll remind you, go back to the subprime recession of 2008 to 2009. That was a very deep recession. Unemployment went up into double digits, 12, 13%, just shy of what it went up in the pandemic recession. This was a recession caused by, I will say, overexuberance in the housing market, low interest rates, facilitating people to buy homes, credit checks weren't done, or they were sort of more lenient. Anyway, we had a housing crash. We did come out of that recession, but for 3 years after the recession ended, we had unemployment that still stayed in the high single digits or double digits for 3 years. So we're talking about unemployment lingering at 8 or 9 or 10%, 3 years after the recession ended. But inflation didn't budge. Inflation was very benign, 1-2%. And I mean, Jay Powell has never said, Jay Powell is the head of the Federal Reserve now. He's never said this publicly, but my interpretation, a lot of other economists' interpretation, was that Jay Powell, as well as Janet Yellen, who again, she's Treasury Secretary now, she had been Fed chair. So the two of them together had a lot of experience. My thinking is, and a lot of other people's thinking is, that they thought the economy would recover from the COVID recession just like it recovered from the subprime recession. That as inflation wouldn't be the problem, higher unemployment would be the problem. Well, they were wrong. They were wrong. Just the opposite has happened. Unemployment sunk and inflation surged. So I think that they were fighting, as people in the military say, they were fighting the last war. They were thinking the last war would be like this war would be like the last war, and instead it wasn't. Another thing that Jay Powell has to contend with, that pent-up spending is still there. People still want to spend. The federal government is still providing some fiscal stimulus. I mean, we haven't had any new COVID programs, but the Biden administration got an infrastructure program passed. They got I'll call it a climate change program, and it's labeled the Inflation Reduction Act. And there's some things in there regarding medical prices, but it's mainly dealing with the climate. And they're long-run programs, but that money is starting to flow. In fact, I've read that the infrastructure money is starting to flow, going to places. So the federal government is actually providing some stimulus. And then the other thing I think that Jay Powell's going to have to contend with is, if we do get those situations where unemployment starts to go up, and again, we're 3.9%, still very, very low, but if it starts to go up, he's going to get pushback, political pushback. He's going to get a lot of criticism. There have already been some folks on Capitol Hill have been criticizing them. Why are you making interest rates so high? My constituents can't buy homes. Why are you doing this? And again, the Fed is insulated from political control, but everyone's human. And there is some thought by economists that if, for example, the Fed gets inflation down, let's say year-over-year inflation of 4%, they may say, okay, we're going to call it a day. We're going to declare victory and call it a day and start to lower interest rates because they're getting hammered in the press and by others. So we'll see how far they go. Do they get to that magic 2% or not? Next slide. Now, this is interesting. There are some economists, first time I've ever seen this, and I've been at this now, if you include my time in graduate school, as well as my 43 years at NC State, and now my 2 years of being a private consultant. Almost 50 years I've been watching the economy. And I was taught and I observed that every time we have a recession, we've got higher unemployment and we've got job losses. That goes with the territory. There are some economists who are saying now that, you know what, this COVID has changed so many things. COVID has changed so many sort of rules of the game. We might get through a situation where GDP actually does fall, but we don't have the labor market contract. And their reason for saying that is that, again, COVID has created this labor shortage. We still have, I think, 2 job openings for every unemployed person. And the businesses have a lot of unfilled positions. Now, usually if you're a business and you've got an unfilled position, I know this from working on hiring committees at NC State, if we had a faculty position open, there was money behind that. We had the money was sort of in the bank or in the budget to pay that. And my guess is most businesses do that too, because they're going to hire someone, they got to have money to pay them. So the thinking is, because there are so many unfilled positions, that maybe if we get to the point where businesses see their receipts go down, so they've got to cut expenses, they'll simply eliminate the unfilled positions and save the money there and not actually lay off anyone. And then further concern for them is that they've worked so hard with, again, the labor shortage. We're hiring people. They don't want to dismiss someone that they got to then worry about rehiring later. So there is some thought. It's a minority group of economists who think this, but there are some economists who think that maybe we could get through a recession-like situation, but without the damage to the job market. So that's something to store away in your brain. I don't think it's likely, but it's certainly a unique thought, because I've never heard this talked about before, talked about it in this way. Next slide. All right, so here's my forecast for what it is. Again, the longer I've done this, the more honest. I think I've always been honest, but I'm even more brutally honest that economists, our crystal ball is not very good. So this is, you saw this before, and this was actually the first slide. This is for North Carolina. This is a path of GDP. Now, actually, I put the GDP numbers here. These are all in billions. So, for example, right now, GDP in North Carolina is, Ted's pointing to about $535 billion. This is annualized numbers. So we're a big state. We produce a lot. My forecast is that the last 2 quarters of this year, not now, but the last 2 quarters, 2023, second quarter and fourth quarter, will be a period of decline in the economy. And you can see that's highlighted by green. I should have probably switched them green, but I used red for North Carolina, so I got a different color than red. Anyway, so a 2-quarter recession, a rather mild recession. That dip, I didn't do the percentage change that, but that's relatively small. And then a fast rebound. You can see I'm predicting beginning of 2024, we start growth again. And by the second quarter, we're back to where we were in the previous year, and actually beyond. By the end of 2024, we're well beyond where we were before the recession. So, and this is pretty consistent with, I'm not out of line with other economists. Most economists who are saying we will have a recession, and it's probably the majority, well, no, it is the majority. I think the last poll I saw was somewhere north of 60% of economists polled, I wasn't in the poll, said we were going to have a recession sometime in 2024 or 2023. There's some disagreement about the timing, but the majority say we'll have a recession. But where they are consistent is I haven't seen anyone yet say this is going to be a recession like we've never seen. We will be comparable to, say, 40 years ago. No, they're saying relatively mild, relatively short. So that's some solace. Next slide. Now, how will unemployment go? That's the number that most people can relate to. People can relate to unemployment. That's why there's so much focus on it. Right now, we're under 4%, I said, both nationwide and state. I think we could get up between 5 and 6%. That would be a very low number for unemployment during a recession. As you recall, COVID recession, we got up to 14%. Subprime recession, we were up around 11, 12%. 5 or 6%. When I was in graduate school 50 years ago, 5% unemployment was considered full employment. You're always going to have some people that are willingly unemployed. So the theory then was, yeah, you're going to have some rate of unemployment always. What's the sort of the normal rate? And it was said 5%. And of course, we've gone below that now. Now I don't, so it would be that'd be an indicator of moderate recession. Now I don't want to minimize this. Anyone who loses their job, that's stressful. Anyone who loses their job, they got to make adjustments in their budget. Do not want to minimize that. And if we had a rise in unemployment from right now, we're at 3.9 in North Carolina up to 5 or 6, we'd add between 50 and 75,000 people to the unemployment rolls North Carolina. So there would be suffering there. Put this in perspective now, however, the total number of people employed right now in North Carolina is just shy of 5 million. So it's a relatively small percentage, but again, don't want to minimize anyone getting laid off. That is a tragedy for them. Next slide. Some people say, I get questions sometimes by people in meetings. Well, the question is, well, Dr. Walden, North Carolina is growing so fast. Won't we just, there may be a recession nationwide, but will we feel it at all? Won't we just, because people are moving here and businesses are opening, won't we just fly by a recession and continue growing? Well, the data are not with that attitude. I've got here the last 3 recessions, COVID, subprime, and then the so-called tech recession in 2001. You can see here the percentage of decline, the percentage loss of jobs in the U.S. and North Carolina. And you can see in every case, North Carolina lost jobs. In fact, in a couple cases, or was it one case? No, in the tech recession as well as subprime recession, we actually lost more on a percentage basis than the nation. So no, we're not going to be immune. And even the big metros, I'm in obviously the triangle, Charlotte, of course, those are our 2 big metros. And when I do talks in the triangle, I don't do many in Charlotte, but I do talks in the triangle. That's a common question I get. People say, hey, isn't the triangle recession proof? Do we really have to worry? Yeah, we do. I don't have numbers here for the triangle, but we get I would show negative numbers here also. So recessions are economy-wide. And that's because we're all linked into a national economy. So this is something for everyone to be concerned with. And next slide, Ted. All right, I want to end on an up note. This is a big deal, I think, for Central North Carolina, and I'm including Moore County in that. You all know that North Carolina has been a leader in recent years in announcements, economic development announcements. Companies want to come here. Some of them are very big and will have a big impact. And I want to highlight 3 companies that made announcements last year that are actually going to locate between the triangle and the triad. VinFast, number 1. VinFast is a Vietnamese EV producer, electric vehicle producer. They are going to, in fact, they've actually started groundbreaking. They're going to build I think it's a $2 billion factory in Chatham County. I think they're going to ultimately employ 5,000 people. Wolfspeed has actually been in the news recently. Wolfspeed is a chip maker. I think their factory is, it's actually also going to be in Chatham County. I think it's a $4 billion factory. I think they're going to employ somewhere in the, say, 3,000 or 4,000. Although today I just read somewhere that they may be actually going to up those numbers. And then the third is Toyota's building a battery factory in Liberty, North Carolina, which is just south of Greensboro. And if you think about these, if you look at a map, these are counties and locations that you could argue are between at least the core of the triangle and the core of the triad, and they're all related to the energy transition that we're going through. Now, I know people have difference of opinion about, are we going too fast, too slow, whatever, and I won't get into that, but obviously there is an energy transition occurring from dependence on fossil fuels to a new kind of fuel that usually people call it renewable. And my point here is that these 3 announcements are going to really put North Carolina on the map in all phases, actually, of this energy transition. And I think very importantly, if you again look at the map, these counties that I forget which county Liberty is, but it's south of Greensboro, and obviously Chatham. If you look at that whole segment there of counties between the triangle and the triad, they're much more rural counties. And then plus, they've got rural counties north. I'm going to use I-40 as a byline. rural counties north of I-40 and south of I-40 that are rural, counties that are rural. Point is that these developments can bring higher paying jobs to a lot of rural residents who have really been left out in the economic growth of North Carolina. And already our great community colleges, the community colleges we have here are just amazing. I know the four-year colleges, NC State, Chapel Hill, et cetera, get a lot of the attention, but our community colleges are absolutely amazing. And they are known for, when a new firm like any of these come in, they will work with that firm and say, what kind of training do you need of workers so that we can give you trained workers? And so that's already starting to happen. The other thing I want to mention here, just as a one footnote, and I think I'll be quiet and take questions. If you think about the energy transition, we need minerals for well, just for chips. We need minerals for EV, for batteries. We need minerals like lithium. There's only one lithium mine in the country in Nevada. Well, turns out North Carolina has significant deposits of lithium. I didn't know this. We do. And there have already been proposals that are being reviewed for 2 lithium mines to be developed in North Carolina. One's actually an existing mine they're going to rehab. One in Cleveland County and one in Gaston County. And my calculations indicate that if both of those are approved, we're talking about somewhere between $1 billion to $2 billion of output from them. And then obviously the lithium could feed right into the batteries that that Toyota are making, and then and so forth. The other thing that's needed, and again, this is all, Walden just learned all this. The other thing that's needed in pretty much anything tech is what's called pure quartz. Quartz is a mineral, but when you mine quartz, other minerals can get mixed in. So the quartz that the tech industry, I've read that if you have a smartphone, there's some quartz in there. This is widely used for technology, but the quartz that's needed is pure quartz, and meaning that it has to be 99% pure quartz. It turns out, and I didn't know this, turns out the biggest pure quartz mine in the world, not in the country, in the world, is in, who knew, North Carolina. Spruce Pine, North Carolina, which is Mitchell County. It's reported that they make as much as half, or produce as much as half of the pure quartz in the world. And so North Carolina, I think the exciting thing of the last year is that North Carolina can play it looks like it's going to play and play an increasing important role in this energy transition. So Ted, I think I got one more slide, and yes, writers always have to hawk their books, and my latest book is called Relaunch. I won't read the subtitle, it was actually too long. And it's about all the changes in the economy that have occurred as a result of COVID, things like remote work, drone delivery, drone delivery of packages, telemedicine, et cetera. How can that affect, how can those changes affect families, and can they affect families in the way that they benefit families? So this is a focus on the family and how all these changes can work and hopefully lead, for some families, not all necessarily, but for some families, lead to an improved lifestyle. So that's the focus of Relaunch. Okay, let me stop. We've got a few minutes left, and Ted or Linda, I will let you handle the questions however you want, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Well, the first question is, I mean, this is a pretty serious question. This comes from BJ Grieve. Dr. Walden, is it as heartbreaking being a Cincinnati Reds fan as it is being a Milwaukee Brewers fan?
Well, I've been a Cincinnati Reds fan forever, since I first probably could walk. My father took me to games at Old Crosley Field. My grandfather on my mother's side was an avid fan. No, I'm not heartbroken. Always eternally optimistic about the Reds. Excited about the new season. Excited about the Reds have a lot of, I think, very promising young players, particularly pitching staff that we saw last year. I've already got, my wife and I are going to Cincinnati in March. Already got my tickets. Going to see Joey Votto's swan song. This is his last year. He's been a great player. I've watched him all the year. No, I'm still stoked about the Reds. I'm also stoked, however, about the Bengals. So
Nice.
my age predates the Bengals. I can remember when Paul Brown was awarded the franchise, and they played at my undergraduate school. They played at Nippert Stadium at my undergraduate school, University of Cincinnati, and now they have a beautiful, absolutely beautiful stadium in Cincinnati. So no, I'm always of the mind that if a team does badly one year, hey, there's next year.
So you talked about the possibility of a recession and decline in GDP in the third and fourth quarters. As we got going today, we got the print this morning. The forecast was 2.6 for the fourth quarter. It came in at 2.9. And I guess in brief, what's contributing to your thoughts that we will see decline in GDP in the third and fourth quarter?
My expectation is based on the fact that I think the Federal Reserve, we still have work to do on inflation. So we still are, I would be expecting the federal funds rate and all other interest rates to go up. I think that we'll begin to see more slowness in the economy. I'm not surprised by the fourth quarter. I mean, the surprise is it was higher than expectations, but the expectations were fourth quarter would obviously positive. So no, that doesn't change my forecast. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we get through this without a recession, but no, that doesn't change my forecast.
And so the other thing that you were talking about, you were referencing Volcker and what he did. And you pointed out that the inflation at the time, I think you said it was like 13%, and that he got the Fed funds rate all the way up to 19%, if I remember your comments right.
Yeah.
So if we see inflation is coming down, so again, I agree with you. Hopefully, it has already peaked, but does the Federal Reserve need to get the Fed funds rate above that inflation rate in order for that policy to work?
Yeah, that's an excellent question and shows your financial background. Yeah, there is some economists believe that if you whatever the peak, well, no, I shouldn't say the peak. You will eventually have to get the federal funds rate above whatever the inflation rate is. It doesn't necessarily have to be the peak. And so right now we're at 6.5 year over year. Let's say that we get down, let's say the next reading, I'll just give you an example. Maybe we get down to 5.5. I mean, that's in line with my forecast that the federal funds rate will go to 5 or 6. So it doesn't have to go above the 9 that we had, but it does need to go at some point. The rule of thumb is whatever the prevailing inflation rate is.
And so is that contributing to your comment? You said that you're expecting inflation to be down to 3 to 4 the year over year by the end of this year. You think it might be 3 to 4%, but I believe you also think that the Fed funds rate might need to be above 5. So there you would have it.
Yeah,
you'd have the Fed funds rate above.
By the end of the year, the Fed funds rate will have peaked. And I think the Fed will be thinking about making noises about maybe even starting by the end of the year, a reduction in interest rates.
Okay.
People, if there are any people in the audience who are real estate brokers, I often get the question, well, Walden, right now, prices are getting better on housing, but the problem is financing that. Is there ever going to be a sweet spot that we get lower mortgage rates, but we can buy before the prices take off again? Because I think they will. I don't think we're in a crash period here. I think that once the interest rate situation and housing settles down and actually rates go down, you're obviously going to see more buying. So is there going to be a sweet spot? And if there is, where do you think that is, where the buyer can get the best combination of interest rate and house price? That is, get the interest rate. Maybe it won't be down at its lowest, but it's going in the right direction, and they get the house price before house prices really start to take off. And there is going to be a sweet spot. And again, imperfect ability to forecast, but I would target the first quarter of 2024. If you are a potential home buyer, you want to buy a home, you've got to buy a home. It's just a matter of when you can get the financing and the price right. I would say first quarter of 2024 will be when we're going to start to see interest rates go down, and that's going to start to stimulate buying, but it's not going to stimulate it enough that housing prices are going to zoom. They may start to trend upward, but you want to catch it before they get much higher.
Okay, so we're already about 15 minutes over. I'll let Linda wrap it up in just a second, but I'll give you one more question coming from the audience. The Federal Reserve has targeted inflation. They say inflation, we want a target of 2%, but there's been some discussion that, well, maybe we need to target inflation at 3%. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I alluded to that they may decide at some point that there could be a couple reasons. They may start to change course even when we're at the 3%, with the idea that, well, their medicine hasn't worked fully, so it's actually going to go lower. Or they may say, look, the damage of raising rates anymore and increasing the chance of a recession, or making, if there is a recession, making it deeper, outweighs our goal of getting down to 2. And plus they're getting political pressure on that. And even though the Fed's isolated, they respond to that. I mean, they pay attention. They may say, we're going to call it success, call it a victory if we get to 3. I mentioned maybe even 4. So yeah, I think that's definitely possible.
Excellent.
Well, I want to thank everybody for their time today. I know we ran over a little bit, but I think it's an important subject for everybody to be able to plan for the year. Dr. Walden, it's always a joy to have you. Ted, we appreciate Hicks Associates Wealth Management sponsorship, as well as all of our champion investors who help make this program a success. We look forward to what the year brings and the exciting news next January, where we might be. I wish everybody a great day, and I thank everybody for their time this morning.
Thank you.